The glass at the end of a good grind stops being glass. That's the thing nobody tells you. You spend 6 hours bringing a piece of fused silica down through the pitch and the cerium slurry, and somewhere in the last hour it quits being a part on a work order and becomes a surface, a thing so flat that light doesn't know what to do with it. I had one of those under my thumbs the afternoon everything started to go wrong, and I didn't know it yet, because the paperwork that would sink Braxton Fairweather's whole shining division was already signed, already dated, already sitting in a drawer with a fuse on it that had been lit weeks before either of us walked in that morning. I ran the flat under the fiber lamp and tilted it. The interference fringes came up like oil on water, straight and evenly spaced. No wander at the edges. Lambda over 20, maybe better. You feel it before you measure it. 19 years at Corrivo Precision Optics, and my hands could still call a surface a full second before the interferometer confirmed it, which the interferometer always did, because I was the one who calibrated the interferometer, and I was the one who certified the standard the interferometer was checked against. Keep that last part in mind. Everybody else at Corvo forgot it. That was the whole problem, and eventually was the whole answer. The shop floor smelled the way it always smelled, pitch warming on the hot plates, the faint mineral sourness of cerium oxide, machine coolant, burnt coffee from the pot. Delia kept alive past all reason. Fluorescent light on white epoxy floor. The low grind of the spindles. It's an ugly, unglamorous room where we made the flattest objects on the eastern seaboard, and the men and women in it were the last people on Earth who could still do it by feel. I want you to picture it plain, because Braxton spent 2 years trying to turn it into a story, and it was never a story. It was a shop. I set the flat in its foam nest, peeled the chamois off my bench, and wrapped the master. Not the part I'd just made, the master. My own reference flat, the one Walter Hauntz ground by hand the year I started, the one I'd carried, from bench to bench, like a man carries his father's watch. Everything in that building traced back to it, whether the org chart knew that or not. I wrapped it, put it in the drawer, locked the drawer. Same as every night for 19 years. That's when Delia came around the partition with a look on her face like she'd found a hare in her lunch. They renamed us again, she said. We were the optical fabrication group when I hired on. Then we were advanced surfaces. Then, for one confusing quarter, we were the center of excellence for photonic value creation, which nobody could say out loud without their mouth going numb. Now Delia informed me, holding up her phone, we were Studio Lumen. Studio, I said. Studio. She thumbed the screen. There's a video. There was always a video. Braxton Fairweather had come to us 18 months back with the title Vice President of Operational Excellence, which is a title you invent when you have never in your life excelled at an operation. He was maybe 34. He wore collarless shirts the color of things that don't occur in nature, and he carried a phone in a ring light like a preacher carries a Bible, and every few weeks he'd stand on the mezzanine and film himself telling the internet about the journey. The strange thing about Braxton, the thing that took me months to place, was that he talked about himself in the third person. Not always, just when he thought he was being profound. Braxton doesn't manage, he'd say into the little lens. Braxton curates. He was building a case study of his own life in real time, narrating it for some future audience that would surely want to know how he'd done it. I used to think it was a nervous tic. Later I decided it was the truest thing about him. The man had already left the room he was standing in. He lived in the version of himself he was going to be quoted as. I watched about 11 seconds of the Studio Lumen video before I handed Delia her phone back. In it, Braxton stood in front of my bench. My bench with my slurry bucket softened out of focus behind him, and said the group was sunsetting a legacy identity to unlock a premium narrative. He said the word artisanal. He said we were going to tell the story of the surface. We didn't tell the story of the surface. We ground the surface. The surface didn't need a story. It needed cerium and patience and a hand that had done it 40,000 times. He asked me for the certification binders, Delia said. Quieter now. Delia Boot was 26, sharp as a scribe, one of maybe 3 people I'd ever bothered to actually teach. She had good hands and better instincts, and she was scared of nothing except being wrong, which is the correct thing to be scared of in this trade. The traceability binders, for the branding refresh. He wants to scan them and put the heritage documentation on the website. I looked at her for a second. What did you tell him? That you keep them? She shrugged. That your name's on all of them. Good girl, I said, and she made a face at girl, and I said good technician, and she let it go. She didn't know yet what those binders were. Neither did Braxton. That was the part that would take everyone so long to understand, that the thing he wanted to scan for the website was the same thing that held the whole plant's right to exist, and that it lived and died with the signature on the last page. My signature. Renewed by my hand every year because the standard it certified was ground by my hand, from a master, ground by Walters, and you can put that on a website all you like. A photograph of a standard is not a standard. Walter used to say a version of that. I'll get to Walter. Raymond Carrivo founded the company in a rented garage in 1971 with a war surplus grinding spindle and a wife who did the books. By the time I got there in the 2000s, he was already mostly a photograph in the lobby and a signature on the Christmas bonus, but he'd shake your hand at the summer picnic and remember that you ground the sample that saved the Lockheed job in '09, and that meant something. Back when the people at the top had ground glass themselves. Then Carrivo sold 60% to a holding company with a name like a dental adhesive, Meridian Structured Holdings. And the picnic went away, and the bonus went away, and men like Braxton started arriving with slide decks about value creation, and the word artisanal got deployed against the very people who were the artisans, as if we needed a young man in a mustard turtleneck to tell us that the thing we did with our hands had worth. I didn't hate Braxton at first. I want to be honest about that. You don't get to my age and stay furious at every consultant who blows through. You'd have a heart attack by 50. I filed him under weather, something you dress for. He'd been through Delaware and Colorado in a med device outfit in Utah. Always 18 months. Always a transformation. Always gone before the numbers came due. I figured he'd transform us, film his videos, and float off to the next place, and the surface would still need cerium and patience after he left. I was wrong about the floating off. He didn't get the chance. But that's the end of the story. And Walter always said, a man who tells the end first has no business at a bench because he's already decided how it comes out. So let me tell you about Walter. Walter Hans, hired on with Raymond Carrivo in 1974 and ground glassed for that company for 41 years. He was the man who taught me, and before he taught me, he taught two others who washed out because the trade doesn't care how much you want it. He had hands like cracked leather and a way of holding a flat up to the light that looked lazy right up until you understood it was the most exacting thing in the room. The first month, I ruined pieces faster than the stockroom could cut blanks. Walter didn't yell. Walter never yelled. He'd take the wrecked part out of my hands, hold it to the lamp, turn it once, and set it in the reject bin without a word, and that silence taught me more than a foreman screaming ever could. About the fourth week, I brought him a flat I was proud of, and he held it up and turned it and set it. Gently this time on the good rack, and he said, "There, and that there is a thing I've chased for 30 years. He gave me the master flat the week before he retired. Hand ground, brass collared, a piece of glass so true it had been the secret backbone of every certification the company ever issued. And he wrapped it in a chamois and put it in my hands and closed my fingers over it. They'll try to buy this off you someday," he said. "Some fella in a nice shirt. He'll want the number without the labor. Remember what I'm telling you." He tapped the chamois. "You can't cut what you can't grind, Christopher. They can cut your pay, cut your title, cut the whole department off at the knee. But the standard lives in the hand that made it. Nobody can cut that out of you. It goes where you go." I thought it was an old man being sentimental. He died 2 years later, and I understood a little more. And on a certain Tuesday in a certain glass-walled room, with a man in a collarless shirt smiling at me across a laminate table, I understood all of it at once. 19 years is a long time to be a load-bearing beam that everybody walks on and nobody sees. I don't say that for pity. I chose the bench. But I'd be lying if I said the invisibility never got under the skin. I trained 6 certified fabricators. 2 of them made lead before I did because they were better at meetings. I wrote the internal metrology procedure the whole plant ran on MET, Piet, 04, 41 pages, my initials in the revision block, and watched a manager present it to Meridian as our proprietary quality framework, without my name in the deck. I calibrated the interferometers that the young engineers used to grade my work. When the Lockheed job wandered out of spec in '09 and 3 shifts couldn't find it, they called me at home at 11 at night, and I came in, and I found it in 40 minutes, and there was no bonus, and no mention, just a coffee gone cold, and a part that shipped Monday. You learn to take your pay in the surface. You hold the flat to the lamp, and the fringes come up straight, and something in you says there, in Walter's voice, and that's the wage that doesn't show on the stub. But a man still has to eat. And the stub started to matter more the year my knees did, and the year the holding company harmonized our health plan into something that harmonized my out-of-pocket up by $4,000. I was 52 years old. I was the most qualified optical fabricator in 3 states, and I was making 11% less in real terms than I had at 45. I mentioned the money because Braxton was about to make it the center of everything. He thought money was the string that held me. He'd read a deck somewhere that told him the way to control a better an employee was to make him too poor and too trapped to leave. He was half right. He got me too poor. He just had the trapped part exactly, catastrophically, upside down. He pulled me off the floor on a Tuesday, 2 in the afternoon, mid-shift, right hand still tacky with slurry. Grant Pelham from HR was already in the focus room when I got there. A little glass box off the floor with a laminate table and 2 mesh chairs, the kind of room built for saying things you don't want a window to the outside for. Grant was a soft man to apologize with his eyebrows. He wouldn't meet my eyes, which told me everything before Braxton opened his mouth. Braxton had his phone face down on the table, ring light and all. He gestured me into the chair like a matador. "Christopher, thanks for making time." As if I'd had a choice. He steepled his fingers. "Braxton wants to have a real conversation with you. A values conversation." I said nothing. Walter's silence. I'd inherited it along with the flat. "We're doing a compensation recalibration across Studio Lumen," he said, "aligning legacy bands to current market realities. Now, your band's been grandfathered high for a while, which honestly is a story about how much we valued you." He smiled like that was a gift. "Going forward, we're recalibrating your band down to the current midpoint. It works out to about a 14% adjustment. 14% on top of the 11 I'd already quietly lost." He said adjustment, the way you'd say sunset or right size, a soft towel thrown over a hard thing so nobody hears it hit the floor. I looked at Grant. Grant looked at the table. "That's a pay cut," I said. "It's a recalibration. To the surface I'm grinding. It's a pay cut." Braxton did a little laugh, the kind that isn't about anything being funny. And then he made the mistake. He couldn't help himself. He'd been waiting to play the card. You could see it. He'd probably rehearsed it into the ring light that morning. "Look," he said, and he leaned back, and something ugly and pleased came into his face. "I'll be straight with you, because Braxton respects you. You signed a non-compete when Meridian took over. 2 years, whole optic sector plus the customer list. So I know this is a tough pill, but realistically, where are you going to go?" He spread his hands, warm, almost kind, which was the worst part. "There's Corrivo, and there's the door, and the door's got a 2-year wall on the other side of it. Your non-compete means you're stuck with us, Christopher. So let's make it work together." Stuck with us. He actually said the words. He said them the way a man drops a winning card he's been palming all night, and he watched my face for the collapse. I gave him a good long silence. Let him have his moment. Grant's eyebrows were apologizing so hard I thought they'd cramp. Then I said, "All right, quiet, even. I understand." Braxton's smile went full and bright because he thought he'd won, and a man who thinks he's won stops checking his cards. I signed the acknowledgement Grant split across. I signed it in the same neat hand I signed the traceability certs. Then I went back to my bench, unlocked my drawer, and looked at the Chanlois for a while. You can't cut what you can't grind. Walter, in my head, dry as chalk. I'd never understood him so completely. The Chanlois is older than Delia. It's a square of split cowhide gone soft and yellow as a callus, and it still smells faintly of the neatsfoot oil Walter rubbed into it back when Nixon was president. I sat at my bench that Tuesday evening after everyone else had badged out, and I unwrapped the master flat and held it under the lamp for no work reason at all. Just to look. The fringes came up dead straight, the way they had for 50 years, the way they would for 50 more if the hand that held them kept faith. Here is a thing I want to say plainly, because it matters to how you judge me later. That night, I could have warned them. I knew what Braxton didn't. I knew the paper in my drawer was the paper the whole plant stood on, and I knew he'd just cut the pay of the one man who could sign it. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to walk into Grant's office the next morning and lay it out. Here is what you depend on. Here is why you can't afford to lose me. Let's talk like adults. A decent company earns that warning. I'd have given it to Raymond Corrivo in a heartbeat. I'd have given it to Walter's ghost. I sat with the flat a long time and decided I would not give it to Braxton Fairweather, not out of spite. I want to be careful there, because spite is a cheap fuel and it burns dirty, and Walter had no patience for it. It was something colder and cleaner than spite. Braxton had looked across that laminate table at 19 years of my life and seen a trapped animal. He'd smiled at what he thought was my helplessness. A man who does that has told you exactly who he is, and the kindest thing you can do is believe him. I wasn't going to save him from himself. I was just going to stop standing between him and the consequences of being him. I wrapped the flat back in the chamois. You can't cut what you can't grind. I put it in the drawer and I locked it, and I went home and slept better than I had in a year. Let me tell you about the paper, because everyone in the story except me treated it like wallpaper, and it was the whole house. Carivo didn't make ordinary glass. We made optical references and precision components for aerospace and defense primes, and that work lives and dies by a thing called traceability. Every part we shipped had to be certified against a calibrated standard, and that standard had to be certified against a higher one, and so on up a chain that ended by federal contract requirement at a master reference flat maintained and recertified on a fixed schedule by a qualified metrologist named on the quality documentation. There was exactly one qualified metrologist named on that documentation. There had been exactly one for 19 years, me. It wasn't arrogance. It was just true, and it was true for a boring reason nobody had bothered to fix. Certifying that master required the ability to actually reproduce the standard by hand, to grind a reference and prove it against Walter's original, and there were maybe a dozen people alive who could do that to spec, and none of the other 11 worked at Carivo. The holding company had tried, once, to cross-train for resilience, which meant sitting 2 junior engineers next to me for a summer. They both concluded, correctly, that it takes a decade, and they both took jobs where you type things. So the traceability chain ran through my hands and terminated at my signature, renewed annually, and the renewal was due in 11 days. If that signature lapsed, if the master went uncertified past its due date, every downstream standard in the building fell out of traceability. And a part certified against an out-of-traceability standard is, in the eyes of a defense auditor, not a certified part at all. It's a paperweight with a story. Braxton had wanted to scan the binders for the website, Heritage Documentation. He'd photographed the surface and called it the story of the surface. He genuinely could not tell the difference between a photograph of a thing and the thing. And he had just cut 14% off the only man who could keep the photograph from becoming the only thing left. I didn't have to do anything to spring this trap. That's the part I savor even now, quietly. I only had to stop preventing it. Nora Vandermeer had been buying me coffee for 6 months before any of this, and I'd been letting her and telling her no, which is a thing you can do for a long time when you're loyal to a company that hasn't noticed you're alive. She recruited for Halveston Optics. If you don't know the trade, understand only this. Halveston was to Carivo what the ocean is to a tide pool. Bigger, better funded, and this is the part that mattered. Carivo's single largest competitor for exactly the aerospace and defense contracts our traceability chain existed to serve. Meridian's whole investment thesis was that Carivo could keep taking bites out of Halveston's market. Nora's whole job was to make sure it couldn't. She found me the way good recruiters find people, by asking the primes who they actually trusted and hearing my name come back from 3 of them unprompted. She was patient and honest, and she never oversold, which is how I knew to take her seriously. We'd meet at a diner off Route 9, the kind with laminated menus and coffee that tastes like the pot, and she'd lay out a number and a title and a lab with better equipment than I'd ever touched, and I'd turn it over in my hands like a flat under the lamp, and I'd say, "I've got a non-compete, Nora." "I know," she'd say. "I've read it. When's it up?" And I'd tell her the date, and she'd write it in a little notebook, and she'd say, "I'll be here." 6 months of that. She never pushed. She just kept the coffee coming and kept the offer warm because Nora Vandermeer, unlike certain vice presidents, understood exactly what she was buying and exactly what it was worth. The morning after Braxton recalibrated my band, I called her. "It's Christopher," I said. "Is the diner offer still good?" There was a pause where I could hear her smile. "The offer got better yesterday, actually," she said. "We got budget approved for a master standards lead. Your own lab, your name on the traceability chain. When can you meet?" "Tomorrow," I said. "And Nora, bring the non-compete. I want to look at the date with you." We spread the document flat on the diner table, right there between the sugar caddy and the little chrome napkin box, and we read it together like 2 people reading a will. 2-year restriction, optics sector, customer list clause. All the teeth Braxton had bared at me across the laminate. Nora ran her finger down to the effective date and the term, and then she went very still, and then she turned the notebook page where she'd been writing my dates for 6 months, and she set them side by side. The non-compete had been signed at the Meridian acquisition. 2 years, running from the acquisition close date, and the acquisition had closed. I watched her finger land on it. 2 years and 1 day before the date on her page. The date we were sitting there in the diner. "Christopher," she said, very carefully, "the way you speak near a sleeping thing you don't want to wake wrong. This expired yesterday." I looked at it a long time. The coffee steamed. Somebody's eggs sizzled behind the counter. Yesterday. The day before Braxton pulled me into the glass box and steepled his fingers and told me I was stuck. The day before he leaned back with that ugly, pleased look and played the card he'd been palming, the wall on the far side of the door. There was no wall. It had come down the day before he bragged about it. He'd threatened me with a fence that was already lying flat on the grass, and he'd been so pleased with himself, he never once thought to check the date, the one number, in a company built on numbers, that a man in his chair was paid to know. I didn't laugh. I want to be honest. I felt the laugh, way down, and I let it stay down, because Walter never laughed at a man over a bad part. He just set it in the reject bin, quiet, and let the silence do the teaching. "Draw up the offer," I told Nora. "I'll start whenever you like." She was already reaching for her pen. I gave notice on a Thursday. I could have made it theatrical. I'd earned theatrical, 19 years of it. Instead, I typed 4 sentences, printed them, walked them up to Grant Pelham's office, and set them on his desk, because a resignation you can hold in your hand is harder to misplace than one you can delete. Grant read it twice. His eyebrows started apologizing again, then stopped, and something like alarm crossed his soft face. Not for me, for himself, a man beginning to hear a distant sound he couldn't name. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, I said. It's in the letter. He glanced at the date on the letter, then, somewhere middle distance, doing arithmetic he didn't have the tools for. "Christopher, you've got the master certification renewal coming up. That's on your calendar, the 11th. "It was," I said. "I won't be here the 11th. The auditor arrived on a Wednesday morning, which surprised nobody but Braxton, because Hollis Trent had been on the calendar for 3 months, and Braxton didn't read the calendar. He read the branding refresh. He read the dashboards Grant built him, the ones with green arrows. Hollis Trent did not appear on a dashboard with a green arrow. She was a thin, patient woman from the prime supplier quality office, and she carried a scanner and a checklist and the flat affect of someone who has watched 100 plants try to charm her and has never once been charmed. She'd been auditing our traceability chain for 11 years. She knew my name. She did not know I was, at that moment, 4 days from being someone else's employee, and neither, I want to note, did most of the building, because I hadn't made a speech about it. I'd made a shop out of it. Quiet. I was still there for the start of the audit. My 2 weeks weren't up. I answered her questions the way I always had, completely, honestly, with the binders open on the table between us. She asked to see the master reference certification. I turned to the page. She read the last renewal date and the schedule, and she looked up. "Renewals due the 11th, she said. "That's day after tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am. You're the named metrologist." She tapped my signature in the block. "You recertifying it before then?" "No, ma'am," I said. "Friday's my last day. I gave notice." Hollis Trent set down her pen. It was the only dramatic thing she did in 3 days, and she did it gently. "Who's your qualified successor on the master?" "There isn't one," I said. "Never has been. It's in the resilience finding you wrote up in 19, and 21, and last year." I turned to the tab where her own words lived. 3 audits deep, flagged and reflagged and closed each time with a management promise to remediate that management had never once remediated. Because remediating it cost a decade of somebody's hands, and Meridian didn't buy decades. "You've been telling them for 4 years, Miss Trent." She read her own findings for a moment. Then she said quietly, more to the binder than to me, "Well, I guess this is the year they find out I meant it." Braxton found out about the audit the way he found out about most things. Late and from the wrong direction. Delia told me later she watched him come off the mezzanine at a near run, phone in hand, but for once not filming, and go looking for Hollis Trent with a smile bolted onto his face. I wasn't in the room, but Delia was, doing chain of custody paperwork in the corner, invisible the way Tex and I had always been invisible, which meant she saw everything. He tried the story on Hollis first. Studio Lumen. Heritage documentation. The premium narrative. He may have used the word artisanal. Hollis Trent, Delia said, waited him all the way out. the way you weighed out a smoke detector with a low battery, and then she asked him one question. Who is your qualified metrologist of record for the master reference standard as of the 12th? And Braxton, who did not know the answer, who did not know the question was a question, said the thing that told everyone in earshot he'd never understood the plant he was rebranding. He said, "We have the full heritage documentation digitized. It's on the site." Delia said. Hollis Trent looked at him for a 3 count. Then she said, "A scan of a certificate is not a certification. I need the standard recertified by a named qualified metrologist on schedule, or the master falls out of traceability at midnight on the 11th. And every standard below it goes with it." She closed her binder. "You have Mr. Edwards through Friday." I'd use him. That was the moment, Delia said, that Braxton's face began to change. Not all at once. Just a hairline crack, the kind you find in a blank you thought was sound, the kind that means the whole piece is going to come apart the first time you put real pressure on it. He came to my bench Thursday afternoon. Last time he ever would. The ring light was gone. That was the first thing I noticed. No phone, no curation, no third person. Just Braxton Fairweather in a teal collarless shirt, and under the fluorescence his face had a color I'd only ever seen on parts that were about to fail thermal. "Christopher." He tried the warm voice, and it came out sanded thin. "I think there's been let's call it a miscommunication, about your situation. I've had legal pull your file." "All right," I said. I kept polishing. The spindle hummed. "Your non-compete." He held up a printout, and his hand wasn't steady. Legal confirmed the effective term, and he stopped, started again. "It says it expired." "When?" I said. I already knew. I wanted him to say it. He looked at the date like it might change if he stared. 2 days before we saber. 2 days before our compensation conversation." Quieter. "The day before." "The day before you told me I was stuck," I said. Not cruel. Just setting the part in the light and turning it once, so we could both see the flaw. "You told me the door had a 2-year wall on it." "There was no wall, Braxton. It had come down the day before you bragged about it." His mouth worked. "You knew." "I found out the next morning." I set the flat down. "You want to know the truth? I'd have told you. If you'd asked me like a man instead of smiling at me like I was a trap dog, I'd have walked you through every page of that binder and told you exactly what you were about to lose. I've saved this company from worse than you at 11 o'clock at night, for no thanks at all. I'd have done it again." I let that sit. "But you didn't ask. You gloated. So I let you keep gloating." "Where are you going?" It wasn't a question. He already knew. His legal team had pulled the file. The file included the customer list clause, and a clause that names Halveston Optics by name told him where I was going. The same moment it told him it couldn't stop me. "Where I'm going," I said, "is the one place the non-compete would have kept me out of. If it still existed. It doesn't." I picked up the chamois off the bench and folded it in my palm. Legal confirmed that too, I imagine. He stood there. And I watched a man realize in real time that the number he'd cut 14% off had been the number holding up the roof. It came apart fast after that, the way things do once the standard's gone. You spend 19 years learning that the surface is patient. The collapse is not. The master fell out of traceability at midnight on the 11th, quietly, without a sound, because that's how paper dies. No alarm, just a date passing. By the morning of the 12th, every reference standard beneath it was out of traceability too, and by that afternoon Hollis Trent's office had issued a supplier quality hold, not a suggestion, a hold. It meant Carivo could not ship a certified part to its 2 largest defense primes until the master was recertified by a qualified metrologist of record, and there was no qualified metrologist of record, because he was across town in a diner off Route 9, signing new hire paperwork with Nora Vandermeer. I heard about the phone call secondhand from Delia, who quit 8 days later and came to Halveston to work for me, which is a happy part of this, and I'll come back to it. She said the primes called Thursday. She said one program manager, a man I'd personally pulled out of a schedule fire in '09, the 11 o'clock job, asked Braxton point blank who was signing the traceability now. And when Braxton started in about heritage documentation and the premium narrative, the man said, "Just tell me if Chris Edwards still works there." And Braxton went silent. And the man said, "That's what I needed to know," and hung up. That program manager moved his qualification work to Halveston within the quarter. So did the second prime. They didn't move it to Halveston because of a slide deck. They moved it because the signature they trusted was there now, and a signature is a person, and the person had a name, and it was not Studio Lumen. Meridian Structured Holdings does not appear in videos, so I only know the shape of what happened at the top. The optics division missed its numbers so badly and so publicly. A hold from a defense prime is not a thing you hide in a footnote. That the thesis fell apart. Within the year, Beridian did the only rational thing left. It sold the division's assets. At a discount that must have stung to the one buyer with the traceability chain intact and the customers already migrated. It sold to Halveston. I want to be careful not to gloat, because gloating is what got Braxton here, and Walter had no use for it. So I'll just report the plain fact, the way you'd report a fringe count. On a Monday, about 14 months after a man told me I was stuck with him, I walked back onto the Curvo shop floor, my old floor, the pitch and the cerium and the burnt coffee, as the Halveston Master Standards lead, come to inventory the equipment my new employer had just bought out of the wreckage. The studio lumen decals were still on the glass of the focus room. Somebody had already started scraping them off. Braxton was long gone by then. No dramatic frog march, nothing for a video. 18 months, same as Delaware, same as Utah. He'd simply floated off before the numbers came due, except this time, the numbers came due while he was still in the water. Last I heard, he was VP of Transformation somewhere in logistics, narrating himself into a ring light, telling the internet about the journey. They let me keep my old bench drawer key. Small thing, but I unlocked that same drawer on my first Monday back, in a building that now had a different name over the door, and I set the chamois down on the laminate and unwrapped the master. 50 years old, that flat ground by a man has been gone a decade, carried by his hands and then by mine through 4 company names and 2 owners and 1 vice president who mistook the photograph for the thing. I held it up under the fiber lamp out of old habit, the way Walter taught me, lazy-looking, exacting, and the fringes came up dead straight, edge to edge, the way they had every day of my working life. Lambda over 20. Better, maybe. You feel it before you measure it. The equipment gets bought and sold. The decals get scraped off the glass. The names over the door change. And the young men in nice shirts come through like weather and float off before the season turns. And they never do learn the one thing Walter tried to sell them for free, that you can cut a man's pay and cut his title and cut his whole department off at the knee, and you will still be standing there afterward holding a scan of a certificate, because the standard was never on the paper. It was in the hand. Braxton thought he trapped me with a wall that was already lying in the grass. What he never understood, what none of them ever understand until the hold comes down at midnight, is that I was never the one who was stuck. He was. He was standing on a floor I'd been holding up for 19 years, and the day he smiled at me across that laminate table, he told me to stop holding it. So I stopped. And I took the standard with me because it was always mine to take. You can't cut what you can't grind. I wrapped the flat back in Walter's chamois, and I locked it in the drawer, and I went to work.